I know you say that the U.S. is already in a recession. How bad is it?
Well, it's going to be one of the worst recessions we've had in a while because we had so many excesses going into it. Alan Greenspan printed money like a wild Indian for a while, and then you had Bernanke come along, and he's also been printing money like a crazy person. So the excesses have been pretty severe. The recession is going to be it's going to be one of the worst we've had in a while. It's not going to be the end of the world. There's no reason to jump out of a window or anything.
What's going to help this recession, Jim? I mean, as you talk about liquidity, but central banks are obviously going to have to cut rates with the threat of accelerating inflation. What about accelerating inflation? How big a worry is that for you?
Well, it's a terrible worry for me. We have inflation in the world right now. The U.S. government and the British government have been lying about inflation. We do have inflation. Everybody watching this show who does his own shopping knows that prices have been and are going up. The more they print money, the worse it's going to be. I mean, this is a disastrous policy which the United States Central Bank is pursuing, and it's going to be bad for all of us down the road. And when I say all of us, I don't mean just Americans. It's going to be bad for the whole world as currencies come under more and more stress and as we have more and more inflation in the world.
And
this is not a good policy.
And you're short the dollar, aren't you, Jim? Is that something? Is that a trade that you expect to be with you for a while?
Oh, well, I hope that by the end of this year that I have all of my assets out of U.S. dollars. The U.S. dollar is a currency which is terribly flawed. It's going to be under duress for years to come. I do not want to own any U.S. dollars. This is not a trading short. This is a permanent investment short, a decision on my part.
Jim, a lot of commodities, of course, are priced in dollars. How does that affect your thinking?
Well, I'm long commodities, but not because of the dollar. Even if the dollar rises, even if I'm dead wrong, commodities are going to go higher. It's because of supply and demand. The supply and demand matrix for commodities is terribly out of whack. All commodities are going to be in much shorter supply for another decade or so. And so even if the dollar goes up, commodities are going to go higher. Now, the fact that the dollar is a terribly flawed currency is just icing on the cake, just makes it all the better.
Jim, but what happens if we get this, global recession, not just a U.S. recession? Doesn't that hurt the commodity strategy? How does that affect our thinking if it's a global slowdown?
Well, of course, if you have a major slowdown in demand, it's going to have an effect on some commodities. There's no question about that. I probably wouldn't buy crude oil today. Crude oil is making all-time highs. I wouldn't buy lead or tin today because we might have a recession. But these are just normal corrections within a secular bull market. Nothing goes up every quarter or every year. You always have big consolidations. That's the way markets work. You'll have it here, but basically we are in a secular bull market. If you're worried about a recession, and as I said, we are in a recession in the U.S., you might think about buying agricultural commodities. I have been buying them recently. I suspect agriculture is going to do well no matter what happens to the world economy.
And we'll come to agriculture in the next section, Jim, and for the two after that. I want to talk about just across the general asset base, outside of agricultural commodities. Where would you put your money? What do stocks look like? What do bonds look like right now?
Well, I am not buying shares of just about anything. I'm selling short. I am short the investment banks in America. I'm trying to short more. I keep thinking there's going to be a rally after the tax law selling. It doesn't look like there is. If they rally, I expect to sell short more investment banks. Not many stocks to be buying in the world as far as I can see right now. I am buying the renminbi. I am buying the Swiss franc. I am buying the Japanese yen. There are things to buy, but for the most part, I don't see too many opportunities in stocks.
And you're not positive on sterling, are you, Jim?
No, I've owned sterling for a long time. I've been selling sterling recently. How'd you know that? That's true. I've been getting out of my sterling.
You forecast the trend back in the late 90s. Why is the trend still very much in place?
Well, the main reason is nobody has invested in productive capacity for nearly any commodity since 1980, more or less. So for 27 years, you've had declining investment in productive capacity. Mines are depleting. Oil fields are depleting. This is the way the world works. If you look at the number of hectares devoted to wheat farming, it's been declining for over 30 years. The inventories of food are the lowest they've been since 1972. This sort of thing has been going on around the world, And we now are paying the price, and we're going to have to pay a much higher price because that's the only way you can bring supply and demand back into balance.
And Jim, you've been really into agricultural commodities since the back end of 2005. How easy is this journey going to be? I mean, there are going to be tough times. Advising investors, at what point do we get in? At what points do we get out?
Well, Mark, I'm a horrible market timer. I'm the world's worst short-term trader that you'll ever meet. There's no question about that. If I were looking, and I have been buying commodities, agricultural commodities recently, if I were looking at new things for most people, I would say, look at something like cotton. Cotton is still 50% below its all-time high. Look at coffee. Look at some of the things that are still very depressed. Sugar. There might be opportunities in some of these things. Don't ask me. I don't know. I've been buying my agricultural index. That's the way I've been doing it. But there's certainly plenty of opportunities left in agriculture.
Talking about coffee, are you most bullish on Robusta or Arabica coffee?
I like the kind down at Starbucks myself. No, it doesn't matter. I mean, if one moves, they're all going to move together. Sure, if you're really smart, you'll pick the one that's going to move the best in the next month or next quarter, but I'm not smart enough for that.
Sticking to the drink-related theme, cocoa forecasting an oversupply this year, but consumption growth does remain strong. How do you expect cocoa to perform this year? Is this one of the ones we should be in?
Well, I would be watching cocoa, especially when people are predicting that there will be oversupply. Whenever you have people predicting oversupply of something in a secular bull market, it usually leads to opportunities because something nearly always goes wrong when you have essentially a bull market. Look at Asia. There are 3 billion people in Asia. They're all trying to improve their standard of living. They like chocolate. They like sweets as they get more successful. I wouldn't kick it out by any stretch of the imagination.
Jim, do you have any doubts about the Asia story, particularly China and India, if we do head into a big U.S. recession?
I have doubts about everything in the investment world. Anybody who doesn't have doubts should not be investing because you're going to go broke if you're not careful, if you're overconfident. Of course, you could have slowdowns in Asia. China is trying to cool off its economy, and they should cool off their economy. They've raised interest rates 5 or 6 times. They've raised reserve requirements 10 times in the last year. You're going to have slowdowns in some parts of Asia. Some parts of the Asian economy, though, will not be affected at all. If you're in power generation or infrastructure in China, you're not going to know there's a recession. In the U.S., you're not going to care. But it will certainly have an effect. But remember, Mark, there are 3 billion people in Asia. They were not playing